I had a sock in my mouth all day. It was just like gross and dry. And, it's just, I don't know when it's supposed to pass, but we're going to be outside soon. Like all weekend too.
Oh yeah.
So, are you ready? I mean,
yeah.
Okay. I mean, we're recording. So,
okay.
I mean, it's so funny. Like when we started this, we only did live recordings. We never had like an intro. Mm-hmm. And then when COVID happened, we had to do everything via Zoom. So it just like almost forced a intro because like you have to click the button. It's like,
and go.
It's like you are being recorded. So now it's just kind of like when we do them live, it's just like whatever. So,
yeah.
But for our listeners, if you didn't catch last episode, we have a small press expo coming up on August 20th at Mayflower Brewery called Pages and Pints. And we have been bringing on the authors to kind of talk about, what they're doing and their experiences and kind of build excitement towards the event. I should have got your pronunciation of your last name. It's Cailin
Cecchini.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. And I know your mom, and I was like, I still can't pronounce your last name.
That's all right.
Cailin Cecchini.
Yep. Cailin, no T.
Cailin. Oh, jeez. See, and I have it written down in front of me,
too. I couldn't get it easy, first or last name.
But welcome to the show, man.
Thank you.
So we were talking like right before we started. Also, Cailin gets mad props because she brought crumbled cookies.
Hey, you can't come empty-handed.
Yeah, I mean, guests that bring snacks are our favorite. Take note, future guests. So you have a book, I have this written down, Moon Day.
Yes.
And then a prequel to that book coming out in July called Wolfstar.
Yes.
Are these your first two?
Yeah. Yeah.
So when did Moon Day come out?
Moon Day came out September of last year.
Okay. So is this like a trilogy type thing? Or?
Yes, not officially, but yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that's kind of the natural... I feel like if anyone came out with just two books, they would be kind of... Like...
Yeah, it was originally just supposed to be one, and then I had an idea for the prequel back... I wrote the first book in 2011, and then I had an idea for the prequel, and then people were like, well, what happened to so-and-so after the first book? And I'm like, okay, here's the third one.
So, I mean, how did you get started? I mean, have you always... You seem like a fairly young person.
I mean, I'm 37. I'm not that...
I mean, it's still pretty young. That's not... I swear I get like... they'll be like, oh, I graduated in like... 01 or something, and I'll just be like, I'm...
Yeah, I graduated in 04.
04. See, jeez. Damn it.
I'm terrible at guessing ages. And people are like, how old do I look? I'm like, I don't know. Because all my friends look young, and then some people, I'm like, you look like you're 60. And they're like, I'm 45. I'm sorry.
So, I mean, were you always writing? Were you writing all through school? And
yeah, I mean, when I was in, like, elementary school, I always enjoyed creative writing assignments. I never really did it on my own. And then in junior high, I remember it was 7th grade. My English teacher, we read some scary story for school, and she was like, oh, maybe for like Halloween, I'll have you guys write your own ghost stories. And I got like very excited about the idea, and she never did the assignment. And I was like, oh, bummer, I really want to do that. And then I was like, well, why don't I just write my own scary story? So I went to Walmart and bought a composition notebook, and I wrote...
The black and white speckled?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I still have it.
Yeah.
I wrote this story that involved me and my friends and our current crushes at the time, and it was about a slasher killer, because this is 1997 at this point when it was all the rage. So there was a slasher killer in our junior high, killing everybody. And my friends all were very excited about reading it. I enjoyed writing it, and that was sort of when I got the bug of like, oh, okay, I really liked doing this, and people seem to really like reading it. Like, so ever since then, it's just... It's
so funny. I'm not a writer.
Yeah.
I firmly believe I'm undiagnosed dyslexic. Mm-hmm. But I love the idea of creating stories and storytelling. And I had an idea for a story, and I was like telling some friends about it, and kind of like, not the elevator pitch, but more like, and then this happens, and then da-da-da. And I got to the end, and my friend's wife, like, let out an audible gasp. And I was like, that's so cool! Like, that's such a fun reaction, is when you have that kind of, not just the family being like, oh, it's a very nice story, but like that, that honest reaction.
Right, yeah. I got addicted to that. Because, my friends would read it as I was writing it in school. Like, I'm supposed to be taking notes in school, and I'd be just writing my story. And then they'd be like, did you write more? And I'd pass it between class, and then they'd throw it back, write more. I'm like, I can only write so fast. I'm only 13.
But horror, people really connect with horror in a strange way. Like,
I know.
And I liked that you mentioned how, like, slasher was kind of, it's weird. I think slasher movies being more like 80s, not necessarily. I feel like 90s was like.
Well, 90s was like, I Know What You Did Last Summer and Scream, and that was like I wasn't allowed to watch any of that, and I didn't till I was an adult.
I was not their demographic for those, because I feel like those are kind of teen movies.
Yeah, I mean, I was 13, 14, 12, 13. So again, I wasn't allowed to watch them. I had very strict parents who were no rated R movies at all.
But your mom's real nice.
Hi, Mom. No, she's very nice.
Yeah.
But my friends all watched them, and they would tell me the plots of them, and I'm kind of glad I didn't watch it back then, because even now I don't do gore very well, and I get very squeamish around slasher stuff. Like, the monster stuff doesn't scare me. Obviously, I wrote a werewolf book, but the slasher stuff makes me a little uncomfortable. So like it's weird that was my first foray into writing.
So what made you go with werewolves?
I was going back to that time period, I was very into, like, Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm giant vampire fan. And then just watching all the vampire movies and shows and stuff, werewolves most of the time came with that. So then I got into werewolves through that. And so for this book, I was actually writing a vampire book that was terrible, and I never finished it. And I had a seed of an idea for a werewolf book that I said I can't do it because I'm working on this book and I want to finish one project at a time.
That's weird. I'm totally the other way. Like,
oh, yeah.
I need like 400 things going on to keep because otherwise I just get bored with one.
Yeah. Well, but I was afraid I wouldn't. I was like, if I start this new one, then I'll never finish the old one, which is exactly what happened. But it was awful, so it deserves to stay there. But I had a friend who, she messaged me, and she was like, are you doing NaNoWriMo? Which, for those that don't know, it's National Novel Writing Month. It happens every November.
Yep, I have a friend that does it.
Yeah. And so she was like, are you doing it this year? And I'd never done it. And I was like, no.
What month is that?
November.
Okay.
And she was like, oh, you should do it. And I said, didn't it start like 2 days ago? And she's like, yeah, you can catch up. So I was like, all right, let's put the vampire one aside. I'll work on this werewolf one. And so I ended up starting it to Moon Day. Starting it 2 days late, I ended up finishing it 2 days early. It's still the easiest book I've ever written. So yeah, that's how that happened.
But why vampire? Not vampires. Why werewolves? It seems like, I know, like I said, I feel like vampires were kind of like big, like late 80s, early 90s, kind of like from like Lost Boys, Interview with the Vampire through then. And then I felt like it kind of went into zombie world. And now, I don't know if there's something now.
It's kind of...
Because I feel like zombies are getting kind of played out and people are getting a little tired.
Yeah, I feel like vampires are starting to come... At least that's what I'm seeing on, like, Bookstagram anyway. They're starting to make a little bit of a comeback.
Yeah.
I think people are getting nostalgia for the early aughts anyway, and that's when Twilight was really big. And but as for why I liked werewolves, I don't know. Again, it was just
You just had the seed idea.
Yeah, I had the idea, and I liked the whole mythology of like the full moon and changing into, another animal and all that stuff. Yeah.
Do you have a particular favorite werewolf other than yours?
Oh gosh, yeah. Like, let's see.
It's funny. Like I don't think like I feel like it's something that could be done so much more. I mean, there's plenty of them, but not a glut like with vampires or something.
No, yeah, it was definitely secondary. But I mean, like there was again, they kind of came more with vampires. Like there was werewolves in Twilight, there was werewolves in the Vampire Diaries and stuff. But Teen Wolf, not the 80s movie, but the show.
Oh, the show. I never watched that. That was supposed to be way more serious,
right?
It
was really, really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially the first couple seasons.
And that's one of those other interesting things about horror is it always seems like, there's like Goosebump horror, and then there's things like, Buffy and Teen Wolf, and what was the one that everyone's going crazy for? Was Wednesday.
Oh, yes.
This kind of like young adult teen, and then, the adult version. It seems like it's like you almost like you ramp up the audience from like a young age. It's a weird thing, but like, I've done a bunch of horror conventions and it is very much a family. You see like 6-year-olds running around like Freddy Krueger. I'm like, why? Like, you don't tell me you haven't seen that.
Again, to each their own, but that's not. It's not that I wouldn't let a 6-year-old watch it, but I don't have kids, so what do I know?
Yeah.
But yeah. I don't know if there's. It does. You're right. It does ramp up. It starts with Goosebumps or Are You Afraid of the Dark? That's the one my friends used to watch.
When I was a kid, it was like horror comics and stuff.
Yeah.
Tales from the Crypt. That kind of.
I remember the. It was a comic book.
Yeah, and there was like a lot of like.
I remember the show.
Trying to remember what like the comics were called. There's a bunch of them. Yeah, now I'm totally
blanking.
Totally blanking. Like Tales to Astonish, maybe. I can't remember. But anyways, so you wrote Moon Day in less than a month.
Yeah.
Was it a similar experience with Wolfstar?
Yeah, so I wrote Wolfstar. Again, I kind of forced myself to do it in a month because going back to NaNoWriMo, then they do Camp NaNoWriMo. It's different this year, but they used to do the same challenge, and I think it used to be July and August or June and August with the same challenge. So that next summer, 2012, I wrote Wolfstar.
So is it like a retreat?
No, it's all online. They just it's just the theme of the thing of being summer campy. And
now, when you write it in a month, that doesn't include the editing, right?
No,
I'm assuming you go back and like
no.
tweak it. How much? Because it just seems like a month is such a short amount of time.
Yeah, well, the pressure is to just get the words on the page. Don't self-edit. Don't overthink it. Just because that's where so many writers sort of trip themselves up, is they just go back and try to make it perfect right away, and it's like, no, just get it out. It's gonna suck the first time. Moon Day did. Maybe it still does. I don't know, but that's later. Just get the story out first, and then worry about everything else.
And so then, how long after that initial month does it take before you're like, okay, this is good enough that I want to put it out there? And being your first book, I'm assuming it had to be intimidating somewhat.
Yeah, well, and I didn't want to go. I'm an indie author, so I did it myself too, which that was scary. I was like, I'm never going to do self-publishing, because it means you have to put on different hats that you don't necessarily fit. Like, I'm not a salesperson, I'm not a publicist, but I have to be.
Yeah. For sure.
So for editing, I mean, again, it was a little different with this because I wrote it in 2011, so it was, before I published it, it had been 10, 11 years. So I had gone through and like tweaked some things every now and then, but when I decided to publish it, let's see, I know I took another couple months to self-edit, to go through and be like, okay, this needs to change. I don't like this anymore. I need to change this name, and all the little things that I could see from my vantage point. And then I hired an editor offline to go through and see what they saw. Some people do multiple editors. Some people do one or whatever, or just have beta readers or whatever. I couldn't afford to do that, so I just did the one editor. And and that process took a couple months, which again, every writer is different. Some writers would be like, what do you mean you didn't take years to edit?
But I mean, that's kind of like everyone has their process, and some people can, to me, it's more like I like that, write it quick, edit it, get it out. Because you can spend 50 years at it.
Exactly.
It's never going to be perfect.
Yeah.
You're always going to have something you want to tweak about it. And sometimes, I'm going to equate it to like the early albums of bands. That you're like, oh, this is great. And then they get wealth and fame and studio time, and then their later albums are like kind of garbage.
Overproduced.
Because they're overproduced, and they lose some of that, I don't know, that I suppose it's a bit of like being really genuine to like who you are and what your message is. If you filter it through like 8 different editors, how much of it is still your story at that point?
Yeah, exactly.
Were you worried about the editor making major changes?
Well,
I mean, it's still kind of your choice, but
exactly, yeah. So I just did a copy editor, and she did very. Well, don't see she did nothing, but she tweaked a couple things. Some change, the main thing I wanted her to do was like point out any like inconsistencies, which she did, and I was like, oh, thank God she pointed that out.
Yeah.
And then I have a different editor this time. The first one I had got through like a writing service, and this one was like a friend of a friend that did an editing business, and she changed some things that I was like, oh yeah, that's better than what I wrote, and there were some things that I'm like, no, that doesn't sound like me anymore. So I just and that's what you can do when you're a indie author, is like you can pick and choose, and you do have to get your ego out of the way and be like, okay, is this better, or am I just being little precious about it?
That is a very tricky thing in any creative. Is that a good idea? Do I not like it because it's just not my idea? And that kind of being willing to try to like step back and look at the end product and not just like, well, this is mine.
Or it can be the opposite of like you're so insecure and be like, oh yeah, everybody knows better than me, and you'll just take every change that someone throws at you. But
I'm kind of pig-headed, so I don't really have that problem. People, I'll take your word for that one. So you put the first book out. Did you do hard copies or just digital?
I did both. So the first one's available in paperback and hardcover and ebook, and it's on Amazon's Kindle Unlimited, which is basically like almost like a Netflix for books.
Type of thing?
Yeah.
Because that's I think that's one of the hard things about books now is, and not. Let me take that back. It's easier now, I think, because of the digital. Because I mean, it doesn't cost you to print copies. I mean, I assume you just upload it and.
Yeah, I don't know how it is with other services. I've never even looked into it. But with Amazon, you can upload anything for free. Not that anyone necessarily is going to buy it, but where the costs come in is like if you do want to get an editor and the cover design and I know some authors pay for like formatting their books. I did that myself because I couldn't afford it. But there's definitely costs, but not as far as just actually putting it on Amazon.
And you mentioned it earlier, and now you mentioned that you formatted the book yourself. And I was thinking about, I can't remember why I was thinking about this the other day, about how we all get into like a creative field because we love to do what we do. And then when it becomes like a job or even a side hustle or whatever, now you're doing like 90 things that you don't want to do to have to do the thing that you want to do that you were already doing anyways. And it becomes like this, at what point is there like a tipping? Like, how do you ever second guess being like, I could just write this just for fun?
I think I wrote it for fun for like 20 years. Yeah. I'm like, well, if there's a possibility I can make a living at this, why not go for it? I mean, I'm in my mid-30s, so I'm like, if not now, when? I tried to go like what you were saying, putting on the different hats and doing the stuff you don't want to do or you can't do. I tried going the traditional publishing route, and I just heard a lot of, oh, you're a good writer, but this isn't for us, or I don't know how to represent this, or whatever. So, I forget what my point was in saying.
But I mean, that is the great thing about it's a double-edged sword. It's a great thing because anybody can put out whatever they're working on very easily.
Yeah.
If it's music, you can upload it to Spotify and anyone can find it.
Mm-hmm.
But it also kind of muddies the water.
Yeah.
Because anyone can do it.
Yeah.
So it really kind of almost boils down to your commitment level and how much of that stuff you don't want to do.
Yeah.
You want to go do podcasts in a room that is lacking in decoration because it's new.
Getting lost in a parking lot because you can't find the building.
Yeah, because it's basically looks like a house. So I mean, it's kind of like this level of commitment, and I love the fact that you're like, if not now, when?
Yeah.
Because so many people are like, someday, and it's. I feel like those people are going to look back and just have that regret of like, oh, I never wrote my novel, or
yeah. I used to work at Borders, rest in peace, and there was a lot of people there that also wrote, but I remember this one woman saying, she's like, oh, I'm so afraid to try to get something published because I'm so afraid of failing. And I'm like, but you're not doing anything, so it's definitely not fail.
So you're already failing. Yeah. Have you had any negative reviews? Because I feel like in the beginning, anytime anyone starts anything creative, they show it, to their family and friends, and mom pats you on the head, and like, that's awesome, honey. But there's almost something more genuine not genuine, but helpful from not just someone being like, oh, you suck, but like we had feedback on one of our other shows where someone kind of called us out for making light of something pretty tragic, and I was like, that's a really valid point that you just made, and now I feel like a piece of shit, and but that's
but at least that's your attitude, and not like,
well,
screw you.
But I mean, that's kind of how you get better, that's the kind of. Have you had anyone?
I haven't had any really bad reviews. I think the lowest has been like a 3-star review, and they're like, which is kind of confusing. There was one that was like, I don't know how to rate this book, and it was like, I enjoyed it, but here's everything I didn't like about it. At the end, it's like, but I'd still recommend it, and I'm like, well, I guess that's good.
Yeah.
But a lot of the things that I feel like I'm getting critiqued on is like, oh, I wanted to know more about XYZ. And I'm like, oh, well, wait for the third book if there is a third book.
That's and that's one of those hard things where it's like, even when they read the third book, in their mind, you see that all the time in like prequels and sequels and whatever, in your mind you have been like, oh, I want to know so-and-so's backstory, and the backstory comes out and you're like, I really wished I didn't know about that because that was kind of crap. Like, were you worried about that as like prequel? Like, would it cause plot holes or,
No, I mean, I covered what I wanted to cover. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
And any other questions people have, maybe I'll answer in the third book. Maybe I won't. Maybe I'll be like, I don't know. Like, doesn't matter. There was, when my editor was going through it, I don't want to give it away, but she pointed out something. She's like, oh, but what happened to this person? You need to show this. And I was like, oh, I never thought like that. People would want to know about that part, but I'm like, I guess I can say something about it if it clears up confusion.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not too.
That's you just made me think of like, to me that sounds like playing Dungeons and Dragons because I'm a big nerd, and as a DM, like, you have to be careful about what you describe in the room and what you accidentally emphasize, because then you have people. There's a great show called Critical Role, and they spend like half an hour like investigating this chair, and the DM's like, it's just a chair. Like, there's nothing about that. It's a chair. And
Yeah.
at that point, they start messing with them to, like, you know.
There was some meme about writers that was like, you know, the writer writes like the curtains are blue, and a teacher's like, oh, the author's alluding to the fact that it's, you know, the outside world or like whatever, and the author's like, no, it just means the curtains are
blue. Yeah.
Effing blue.
I see that a lot, like in some of these like movie deep dives, being like, oh, you know, this is a symbolism of, you know, this character, and I'm like, is it?
Yeah.
Is it? Or did you watch the end and watch it again and be like, oh, you know?
I mean, sometimes it's good ideas, though. If someone wants to point something out, and I'll steal it.
Yeah.
Like, yes, that is exactly what I meant.
But, and I mean, even with kind of like mysteries, you know, I haven't read your book. I apologize.
No.
But, like, is there any kind of, like, trying to seed hints at what's going on and, like, not trying to give it away at the same time?
Yeah, there's definitely, what's the term? I'm totally blanking right now. Plot twists.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple in there. I don't want to say anything.
Right, yeah, no, but I mean, like, there's sometimes where, like, the best stuff is when that plot twist is revealed, and then you're just like, I don't even understand how the author or writer or whatever could even, like, come up with this intricate story. And other ones where you're just like, oh, that guy's the killer.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah,
and it's like that kind of...
I mean, hopefully nobody guessed my plot twist. But if they did, that's...
I had an ex ruin a movie for me one time.
Which movie?
Have you seen Rear Window? The
No.
Johnny Depp.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Secret Window.
Secret Window, sorry. So, spoiler alert for anyone.
I haven't seen it in a long time.
But at one point, my ex goes, oh, they smoke the same cigarettes. And I'm like, oh, why did you do that?
Oh,
She's
my
like,
mom's so bad at that, too.
and she goes, why did you what? And I'm like, never mind. Forget it.
My mom always guesses the ending. She's like, "Oh, it's that guy."
Well, I was just mad.
Shush.
I was so mad because it wasn't that she gave it away. It's like she just noted something that gave it away.
Yes.
But she, in her wisdom, wasn't able to put those two things together.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm that clever, but hopefully people don't guess before they. But if they do, whatever.
So, little self-promotion. Patience and Pints, August 20th. Is that going to be your first time kind of like being face-to-face with potential fans and fans?
Yeah,
and
hopefully it's just my friends showing up.
Oh, I hope not. I hope it is packed. I mean, come on.
Not hopefully, but yeah.
I mean, and the nice thing about it is, you know, your friends and family, I'm sure, will come out to support. Mm-hmm. But all the other authors, friends and family will too.
Yeah. And
so you have this kind of, you know, everyone's there to kind of support authors, and then hopefully get, 2,000-3,000 people, to kind of come in and buy some books. And
yeah, because I mean, book people are enthusiastic.
Yes, they are.
So.
And every book, and like I said, I'm pretty certain I'm dyslexic, so I'm not a great reader. But every book person I know, their biggest fear or loathing is moving. Because they're like, oh, I have like 400 books I have to pack and move. I'm like, whose fault is that, man? Like, that's on you. There are Kindles and...
Yeah, I've moved a couple times and I was like, I actually tried not to keep too many books, just because I don't have the room. But... There's some, it's like, and especially now where it's like I'm in the indie field, and now it's like I know different cover designers and I know different authors and I know cover photographers and stuff. So I'm like, yes, I'll buy all your books and keep them.
Yeah, and that's
so now I'm like, oh crap, now I need another bookshelf.
I'm assuming that's just like occupational hazard.
Yeah, because I mean, you do need to read a lot if you're going to be a writer, just to. So one, that you know what's out there, but two, it just makes you a better writer because you're like, oh yeah, that's a good way of saying that. And you just, I don't know the way to word it, but you kind of learn just by watching other people do it at the same time.
I mean, it's the same thing with like any, musicians listen to a lot of music.
Right.
I watch and listen to a lot of content.
Yes.
I mean, I obviously like it. So why else would I be here?
Right.
What are some of your favorite horror type things, movies or.
Yeah, like
you mentioned Twilight a few times. Are you like a Twilight person? Because that is very like polarizing.
I wouldn't call that horror though.
Okay, all right.
No, I mean, see, that's the thing. It's like I'm not a big like horror person. I'm not in the sense of
like the more mystery or macabre, like.
Yeah, like I'm a big. Like, Interview with a Vampire. I don't know if that's considered a horror movie. Some people would. But I also like...
I would classify that as horror, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean... But, like, that doesn't scare me, I guess.
Okay.
That's going that way. I guess it depends on the definition.
I don't think horror has to scare you.
Oh, okay.
Because, I mean... I... Like, the horror movies I love... Mm-hmm. I hope doesn't scare anybody because they're god awful. You know, like that's what I love. Like I'm not into Sharknado. Like I watch it, it's fine, whatever. Like I want someone to make a real, genuine effort at a movie and fail.
Yeah.
And it's like the 1950s. Like there's all sorts of great like cheesy horror movies, and like some of it. It can still be a good story. They just don't have the budget, so you can see the good story behind it. But yeah, I don't know. I think to me it's more weird and twisted because like some horror movies, I'm just like, I mean, I know it's not real blood. It's just I've seen. It
still makes me squeamish.
I've seen so much special effects makeup like. In general,
but again, not if I'm watching a vampire movie. Like, the blood doesn't scream. For some reason, I can disassociate with them. But if it's someone with, like, an axe, I'm like, for some reason, that is like, and then I can't, then I'm sleeping with the lights on.
And it's like, I don't know, like, when I was younger, the things that, like, freaked me out was any movie that started with, like, based on a true story.
Oh, yeah.
Because I was a kid, and I'm like, oh my god, this really happened.
The whole thing happened.
And then you find out, like, that is a very loose term, you know?
Yep.
And then you're like, oh, it's kind of all bullshit. So, yeah, I don't know, man. Like, I was talking with an author yesterday. Yesterday. And she's talking about how she's going through this, like, personal deep dive of, like, all the things that like made her and like watching these movies that she hasn't watched since like she was a kid and like really thinking about like what were like those key movies. And I've been like thinking a lot about that, and like one of the things that I'm like, oh my god, like I loved that as a kid and it explains a lot is there used to be a show Ripley's Believe It or Not, and it was this weird like crossroad of somewhat scientific, historical, but at the same time macabre and disturbing, and like, I'm like, yeah, that
explains a lot.
Pretty accurate. And I don't know if I was old enough that I should have been watching it, and it was done like really creepy, and so like I really love, I have a small collection of skulls, and like I like dark imagery and macabre, but not a serious person at all, and I'm silly, and I love when horror movies are not good, but I don't generally find horror scary. Like I don't.
That's good.
Yeah, I don't ever think of it as being like, oh, I had bad dreams from such and such. It's usually just like that was a really good story, or
supernatural stuff. Like again, doesn't bother me. That does, because I'm like, oh, it's not real, or maybe some of it is, but as soon as you start getting into that could which I know it's like, oh, yeah, Michael Myers, like, that's really going to happen. But in my head, I'm like, but it's possible.
Well, it's
he could be outside.
It's not that Michael Myers, per se, could happen, because he is a supernatural character,
True. He has died a lot.
But human beings massacring other people, kind of, that happens a little more than I'd like to think about.
Yeah.
Is that what you find disturbing about it? It's just like...
Yeah, just people being horrible. Like, I don't like... That unsettles me. That doesn't, like, sit well with me. But I'm like, oh, I feel like the more outrageous the monster, the less I'm scared of it. Like, like I was talking about Buffy. Those vampires I don't find scary at all because they got the bumpy heads. And I'm like, they look ridiculous. But if you just get, like, a vampire with just the pointy teeth... It's like they're so human, but there's that one thing that's just off about them that like creeps me out.
The ones that I found I think the most disturbing was 30 Days of Night.
Oh, yeah.
Because they were pretty human, but at the same time alien enough. But like not in a... You're right, not in a ridiculous way.
Mm.
So you're like, they just have black eyes and pointy teeth and...
Yeah, and just, there's no escaping because it's dark all the time.
Yeah. But how do you feel about... oh, man. Come on, brain. Things We Do in the Shadows?
Oh, my gosh.
Is that stuff we do in the shadows or things we do?
What We Do in the Shadows.
What We Do in the Shadows, thank you.
I just saw the movie. I had never seen anything, and my sister, foster sister, she was like, "How have you not seen this?" So last year we watched the movie, and then she was just visiting for a couple months, and she's like, "We're watching the show," and now so I've been binging it. I'm on season 2 now.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hysterical.
It's so funny because like I had never even heard of it, and my son has a friend Peter, and Peter's like the Nosferatu one in the basement that like they keep kind of locked up, and they're like, "Oh, who let out Peter?" And I guess that's what they say to his buddy anytime he does something stupid. So I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. I was like, "Oh, you should watch it." And I watched it. I'm like, this is amazingly ridiculous. Like that's to me the kind of horror. Like I love Shaun of the Dead.
But is What We Do in the Shadows considered horror, or is it just a comedy? That's where that's the line. I don't know.
What about Shaun of the Dead? Shaun of the Dead is an
never
amazing...
seen Shaun of the Dead.
Get out.
Sorry.
Get out. Take your cookies with you. Wow, really?
Yeah, I don't really like the zombie stuff. Because again, it's not really that they scare me, it's the gore.
It's all right, okay. There may be some moments of that movie that you find unsettling. But it's to me it's genius because it is a buddy comedy that by the end turns into a legitimate horror movie.
Oh.
And because, I mean, the whole start of it is the fact that the zombie apocalypse is happening and they're not smart enough to know that it's going on. And, yeah, that's, wow, I can't believe it's such a good...
Okay, I'll go home and watch it.
That's fine, whatever. I'm not going to delete this episode. Whatever. Yeah, I don't know. I find that about any genre. Like, I want... Because to me, I think that makes it more real. Mm. You know, I've had tragedy in my life and some, awful situations. But I'm not a serious person, so it's like I've cracked jokes at funerals. I've had other people crack jokes at funerals.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a little bit of letting off that pressure, and it seems realistic. And I'm not sure if you're a Game of Thrones fan.
Oh, yeah.
What did you think of the show?
In general?
The House of Dragons.
I didn't watch House of Dragons. I watched the first couple episodes, but I haven't.
See, I did the same thing. And then I was
like, I'll finish it. Yeah, no, it wasn't because I didn't like it, but I was just like, I just got
and I couldn't put my finger on it, like why I wasn't like into it. And my buddy goes, well, it's not funny. And I'm like, Game of Thrones isn't funny. And he goes, it's really funny. And I thought back, I'm like, yeah, it's really funny. Like, that show is hysterical. Yeah. But in a very realistic way.
Yeah, that was the same thing with, what was that show? Sons of Anarchy. Like, I loved the first one.
That's a show I couldn't get into.
Oh, really? Oh, see, the characters in that one, the first series was, like, really good. And again, there was humor. It got darker as it went on, and the humor kind of went away. But then they did the second show, and I was like, oh, I'm so excited. And I was like, oh,
is that the Mayans?
Mayans MC, yeah. And I have seen some episodes, but I was like, oh, it's not as, like, funny as the first one. Maybe it got better. But
yeah. I just didn't find any of the characters redeeming.
In Sons of Anarchy?
Yeah. Like, I couldn't get behind any of them. They're all scumbags. I don't like any of them. And, like, I have to, like, you don't have to be perfect, and I don't like if you are perfect. Like, Superman. Like, I want you to be realistic, but I have to feel like I'm pulling for you in some way. Mm. Like, I was talking... My friend, I started rewatching Breaking Bad.
I never watched that.
And that's fine. You don't have to watch that. Whatever. But I love it because you start off kind of like rooting for one character, and then like in the middle of the series, you end up going, oh, he's the bad guy, and the other guy is the redeeming character that you're like, oh, I'm really pulling for... That's the guy I love, and in the beginning you're like, hey, he's kind of a piece of shit. And then by the end, you're like, no, he's the hero.
Oh.
Yeah, so I love that kind of like, but there's always someone that you're kind of pulling for.
Yeah.
And like Sons of Anarchy, I just was like,
I had a crush on Charlie Hunnam too, so that might have had a lot to do with it.
Oh, whatever.
If there's a cute
pretty,
guy in it,
he's
like
pretty, whatever. Yeah. I get it. He's fine, I guess, if you like handsome blonde guys. So you hinted at a trilogy. Mm-hmm. Are you writing that one in a month? Are you going to write that in November?
That draft was written also back in 2012, so there's a first draft.
Oh, you already have a draft for it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
But it has not been touched since then. And it's one of those things that I like, if I remember it right, I'm like, I think there's a serious ending issue that I need to work out, so I'm kind of like, oh, that's a problem for another day right now.
Yeah.
But hopefully. But it depends on people liking and reading the first two as well.
Well, to kind of segue, because I'm a professional, because all professionals call it their segues, mm-hmm. Where can they go to find the book so they can read it?
So Moonday is available now on Amazon, and I think the paperback is still on Barnes & Noble. Yes. And then Wolfstar will be out July 26th, hopefully if all goes according to plan. Yeah, and that'll also be on Amazon in ebook and paperback.
July 26th, so that's like perfect timing.
Right before.
It'll be brand spanking new,
yep.
Pinch and Pints. Still be shiny and new.
Yep, I'll have it all signed and ready to go.
Come down and get an autograph and bring her a copy of Shaun of the Dead. If anyone has anything.
Or Breaking Bad, apparently.
I mean, Breaking Bad is one of those. See, I feel like if you like horror, you need to see Shaun of the Dead.
Okay.
But
I'm
Breaking
not into
Bad.
zombie horror.
Okay, fair.
But maybe I'll like it.
I'm still going to argue against. I mean, so have you watched Last of Us?
No.
Okay.
No.
Interesting. See,
my parents have.
Well, the funny thing is, like, I don't. That's a great one. Where is this horror? Isn't it?
Mm.
Because it's sort of zombies, but not.
Yeah.
But in my brain, I think of the whole thing as a post-apocalyptic. Like, I would put it with, like, Waterworld and, I'm trying to think of another.
I know,
like Mad Max and, like, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that, to me, that's, like, that kind of movie. And there just happens to be...
More like an action?
No.
Oh.
More like... And it's one of those... The real heart are people. Like, that's kind of like that Walking Dead thing was, you know... What was it? Their tagline used to be like... Beware the dead or fear the living or something like that. It was kind of like, there are zombies... But the real awful things in this world are people, not necessarily zombies.
I didn't watch Walking Dead, like, straight through, but I saw a couple episodes, and, like, the one episode I did see was, like, it wasn't the zombies, it was just some guy, like, slashing people's throats, and I'm like, oh, God. Like,
yeah.
That's what I don't like.
Yeah, like, the people in that show.
Yeah.
I mean, the zombies are there and will kill you.
Right.
I mean...
The zombies just gross me out. They
could
don't
be
really
bears,
scare me.
you know? And it's like, it's the same thing. It's like, bears will kill you, but people will ruin you.
Yeah. Yeah. Ooh.
So, I really am into this whole, like, childhood exploration thing. What is one thing, book, movie, music, or otherwise, that, from your childhood, that you think people should check out? And not something, you know, obvious stuff. Be like, oh, Wizard of Oz. But, you know, maybe something a little off the radar that you kind of feel like...
Put me on the spot.
Yeah, it's my job.
Oh, gosh. I mean, I was a Disney... I mean, this is, like, yeah, that's an obvious answer, though. But, I mean, I was a Disney... Still am, like, a Disney fanatic. Like, The Little Mermaid's, like, my favorite movie of all time. But, I mean, that's not something niche. Oh, gosh. One that I will mention, I guess, that, like, I always found funny, and, like, my friends... Okay, so... There was the show, Tiny Toon Adventures.
Yes, there was.
And then there was the movie, Tiny Toon Adventures, How I Spent My Summer Vacation.
Okay, unfamiliar, but sure.
Have you seen it?
No.
Okay, that's the thing. So this movie, like,
It probably wasn't meant for me.
True. But it's hysterical. Like, my dad quotes it to this day. Like, so me and, like, my friends that grew up in our town... I grew up in Norwell, Massachusetts, and... there was a copy of it at the library. So everyone in the town, all the kids my age, saw this movie and quoted. Nobody else I know has like ever seen this movie.
Oh, isn't that a weird thing?
And we're like, did we own the one copy of this movie?
I definitely have friends where like I'll quote something specific and they're the only ones that get it.
Yeah.
And I mean, and sometimes it's like real life happenings, and other times it's a specific thing. But then it's always one of those, you're like, you say it and then you bring it up like, you have to be careful you say that around because it makes no sense to anybody.
Yeah. No, it's one that I quote like on the day. Like I'll just say a random line and like my dad will crack up or my sister and brother will crack up, but my friend that grew up in Minnesota, or not around me, was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. And then you're like, you didn't see it? Like, what's
you
wrong
didn't see Tiny Toon
Yeah.
Adventures?
All right, well, I have to put that on the list, I guess.
If you can find a copy.
It's got to be out there somewhere. So we gave it where they can check out your book, and they can come and meet you in person at Pages and Pints on August 20th at the Mayflower Brewery. Mm-hmm. And then, come in and have a beer and get their book signed.
Yep.
Perfect. And thanks, guys, for listening. We'll catch you guys next time.
Thank you.
And thanks for checking out the show today, listeners. If you enjoyed the content today, you can go over to patreon.com/Inebri-art to support the show. You can join over there for just a few dollars a month and help us provide this fun content that you just checked out. You can also email us at Inebri-art.com with your questions, complaints, and concerns, or you can find us on all social medias at Inebri-art or at Inebri-art6 on Instagram. And also don't forget to check out our other shows, Bar Talk Podcast, Old Colony Cast, Inebri-art, and all the other shows on the Inebri-art Network, which you can find at Inebri-art.com. Thanks again for listening.